Hello and welcome back to another episode of Bestseller Live. I am your host, Cynthia Johnson, and I am here today with an incredibly successful author and successful business person in general. We have Dr. Vijay Pendakur, who is the author of the best-selling book, The Alchemy of Talent, Leading Teams to Peak Performance. A seasoned organizational leader, Vijay has held executive roles at companies such as Zynga, VMware, and Dropbox, and served as Dean of Students at Cornell University. He was also appointed Presidential Advisor for Diversity and Equity at Cornell, where he led campus-wide transformational initiatives. Widely recognized as a thought leader, and his work has been featured everywhere from Harvard Business Review to Fast Company and Time. Vijay is also a board of advisors for Ezra Coaching, Enterprise Ireland, and Whisk. He currently resides in Austin, Texas with his two lovely daughters and his wife. Welcome, Vijay. It's so amazing to have you here.
Hey, it's so great to be here. I'm excited to have this conversation with you and get to know you better over the course of our time, Cynthia.
Yes. Yeah, this topic really piqued my interest because I've always said that, you leading a team is the second thing that comes with the thing you chose to do first. And so some people have these natural gifts and talents. And for from others, right, we need to learn. We need to understand fundamentals. So I'm curious, what led you to writing the book?
Sure. So, I think I'll start on a personal level, and I'm really thinking about this based on what you just said, which is leading a team is kind of the second thing that we sign up for, not the first thing. And it's so interesting for me when I look back over my career, the first time I got a promotion into a role that had me leading a large team, like a team. I had one direct report, and then I got a promotion, and then I was leading a team, right? And in leading a team, for me, I remember going home and talking to a person I was dating at that time, who's now my wife, and saying, I actually think that I am doing better now than I was before I got this team. Work is easier for me. I'm accomplishing more. I'm happier leading this team than I was as essentially a glorified individual contributor. And it was the first signal for me that maybe for me, unlike so many people, that I've known and been friends with and led myself, that actually leading a team is a better alignment for me than being an individual contributor. And I know that this is not the way most people are necessarily geared, but it is the way I'm geared. So one thing that got me to write a book on leadership is this is something that has, that when it clicked for me, actually allowed me to do the best work of my life. And I would love to bring some of the things that helped me experience team leadership as jet fuel for my own career to other people. That's one driver on a very personal level for why I wrote The Alchemy of Talent. I think on another level, there was this curiosity, a burning question. And I know we're going to have some authors listening today, right? And you cannot get through writing a whole manuscript and then the publication process unless you've got a burning question or a burning thing, right? And I've been in large, complex global organizations for 20 years, right? And across these organizations, one of the things I saw over and over again is that disruption is normal, right? There's always some form of disruption. These waves of disruption just hit the org. Either they're internal because of reorg or a new CEO or a new, or macro, right? Some big change in the marketplace, or something happens in the world, like a pandemic or a war or supply chain disruption, whatever it might be. So that's always there. But in the face of those disruptions, I've been on teams, I've led teams that have done amazing work. And I've been on teams and I've led teams that have really struggled and suffered and even failed during disruptive change. And so the haunting question that kind of kept me up at night, that got me to write this book, was why is it that some teams crumble in the face of disruption and other teams actually gel and thrive and conquer disruptive change? And when I started to look at the research, I was like, oh, I've got to codify this into something really accessible and simple and fun for team leaders, because we're all dealing with so much disruption, but we don't all have the playbook for conquering disruptive change.
And it's becoming more, disruptive change is happening faster, or at least maybe
sure feels like it.
I'm just in the throes of it lately, and I wasn't before. So take it back a second. When you talk about teams, are we talking about 5 people, 100 people, an entire company? What is a team?
That's a great question. I've done a fair amount of interviews, and I have never been asked what is a team. That's a great question. I mean, so I would say that team. So one of the really interesting pieces of research that I encountered was actually that in many companies now, the size of teams is unprecedented, meaning like they've gotten a lot larger. People are regularly on teams. Like, and I don't mean your whole P&L. That's not the team, right? Your whole vertical or whole silo is not the team. The team is the functional group that is tasked with owning and accomplishing goals, right? And that functional group has grown over time, particularly in complex organizations, and the place that I wrote, with the book in mind for. People are regularly reporting back to organizations like Deloitte and McKinsey that their team is now 35 people. 45 people. And 20 years ago, the average team size was 5 to 10 people. But I actually think from a leader's perspective, when I wrote this book, I have the book on my desk, when I wrote the book, I was thinking about somebody who leads a team of 5 or more people. 5 might seem like somewhat of an arbitrary number, but I think when it's you plus 5 and you've got a team of 6 or above, you as the leader really have to start to have a better toolbox to manage differences on your team. And the more people you have on the team, the more you need ways to manage those differences that actually turn into the superpower of the team. Or if you're leading one of these cross-functional, extremely complex teams that have become more normal in global companies, where you have 35 people on your team on 3 continents, 3 generations on the team, and you don't have the skill set to take those differences and turn them into a superpower, what do those differences become? They become the albatross around the team's neck, right? And the leader is overwhelmed by a lack of cohesion and fracturing within the team. And then all of a sudden, team outcomes really suffer. And we're not even talking about disruption yet. We're just talking about the table stakes of leading these days, right? And so a team is a group of people charged with owning and solutioning against shared goals. That's like quick offhand. I'm sure there's better definitions on the web, but that's a quick way to get there. I think that the other thing, that I would say is that makes a team is a group of people who feel a really strong sense of interdependency with each other. I cannot win if you are not winning. A good team, right? A functioning team. Cynthia, if you and I are on a team, I should see your success as critical to my success and the team's success. And that means that the team actually needs to have an identity that transcends any one individual on the team. Obviously, you have individuals on your team, but the team itself needs an identity. And that's part of the magic of what leaders have to do. They have to take a group of individuals and make them into something bigger than the sum of the parts.
Yeah, I love that. I can't win I'm not winning if you're not winning. The most overlooked statement. I mean, I don't know if you just came up with that or something. Like, it's really brilliant. Because that's when I ask about what is a team, is because we all also exist on multiple teams. So you have, let's say, maybe you're on the leadership team, maybe you're on the board, maybe not, and then maybe you're running 3 teams. So now you're on 5 teams, right?
That's right.
So how important is it identifying as a leader your unique position within all of the different teams? Because you're not a leader in all of them. If you're a leader, you probably have someone above you in the leadership team.
Yeah. That's a great question. I do agree that the vast majority of leaders who lead a team are also on a team where they're not the leader, right? They're a team member. And I think that part of knowing your position that comes with maturity, right? And as you work more, is knowing that you have a different type of responsibility when you're showing up in a room and everybody on the team is looking at you as the leader. And then you go to a different meeting that week and you're the person looking, at the leader and expecting certain things of them. The thing that comes to mind that I think is worth saying about this duality of relationships that I think we all carry in scaled organizations is one of the best places you can learn and grow as a leader is from being a fantastic team member. Because, it's as a team member that you can sit there and notice, I am so frustrated with my leader right now. They're not being transparent with the team. We all know that there is going to be some redundancies after this merger is complete, and they refuse to name the elephant in the room. Let's notice that what you're desiring as a team member is candor and transparency, and the lack of it is decreasing trust. Okay, let's flip that around. What do you need to inhabit? What behavior do you need to drive with your team then so that you can continue to earn and maintain trust? Oh, I need to find ways to deliver candor and transparency to my team so that I can unlock durable trust, right? So frequently we actually have a learning laboratory for leadership by being a team member. And that's professional development built into your job. I just gave an example of learning from what's not working well. But we also, if you're lucky and you have a good leader, you can learn from things they're doing well. Wow. We just had a very intense brainstorm where, two people on the team butted heads big time, but we're all leaving this brainstorm feeling strong and together. What did my leader do that actually turned conflict into productive friction? And how do I figure out what parts of what they did work for me authentically? Because I lead a team too. And I think that what this is, the coaching language here is around self-awareness and reflexivity. How do you take what's happening in one space, look at yourself, and adopt the things that allow you to move forward in your life? And that's a form of professional development that when I'm coaching executives, they're often not putting into play. They're waiting to go to some 3-day offsite once a year or take an extension course at a business school. And it's like, no, you have a version of a masterclass for leadership in your company, whether you have a bad leader or a good leader, because it's actually steady drip, incremental learning that you could be exposing yourself to if you had the right mindset.
The right mindset, yeah. It's well, tell me. So you've outlined some core concepts, right? Like, what are, because this sounds like a situation I've been in on both sides. Lack of self-awareness, have self-awareness, great on a team, maybe not leading a team correctly, right? And you start to identify over years of trial and error, essentially, and working through things where maybe your strengths and weaknesses are. What have you outlined in the book as these core principles if someone's starting like day one?
Sure. So the logic model of the book starts with disruption. And I use a term called VUCA. VUCA is an acronym that stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And the reason I start with VUCA is because we are all living in the semi-hellscape of endless VUCA right now. You said it, earlier in the call, like it just feels like the waves of disruption are hitting us harder and faster. And there's really complex reasons for that, but largely from a scientific or an empirical perspective, there's wide agreement that yes, the waves of change are coming faster. And so the backdrop to why I wrote a book on leadership is VUCA, is the reality that we don't really get to work in an ideal state anymore. And maybe we never did, but the books that are written that assume some kind of ideal chessboard are not as useful. And what I wanted to do was write a leadership book that assumed you were working in a slow motion earthquake, because I coach and train executive teams across dozens of companies, and they all describe work as working in a slow motion earthquake, right? And so I'm like, okay, what would it look like to bring forward a leadership playbook that's purpose built for that? Well, there's a couple of things that need to happen if that's going to be what I produce, right? One, it has to be radically simple. People, the more stress you're under, the less you can retain. And if you think about your life, right, like in periods of extraordinary stress, I know my life, when I've moved across the country for a job I was excited about, and within a couple of weeks of landing in a new city, like when I screwed up major logistics and got into a fight with my wife because I completely missed a date night or whatever, right? Like it's because I'm overloaded. I can't, the computer is saying like too many browser tabs open, right? And lag time is increasing. So we all got a lot of browser tabs open. So whatever we do has got to be super simple. So that was one design principle for the book. And the second was, there has to be very few barriers to entry for what I'm advising you to do. So this cannot be stuff that requires budget or, oh, you need to change companies. These have to be behavioral science hacks that people can put into play within 2 weeks of reading the book. And so what I do is the book is intentionally designed to be read on a 3-hour flight. So the whole thing is about half as long as your traditional business leadership book. And that's by design. It's also filled with like really accessible charts and stories and illustrations that were not written in the business modality, but more so like a graphic novel. So like the artwork in the book was done by Jerusha Yeager, who's a brilliant artist who worked with me to produce art that felt so much more normal and real and not like a business book. And partially that's because that's what sticks, right? Images convey like 50 times the data that words do. And so the whole thing was built around like, if people are on overload, what's going to stick? And what is in the book is 4 kind of real buckets of tactics. One is around understanding the power of productive friction on your team. And the productive friction is kind of the most overlooked driver of teams that innovate consistently in the slow motion earthquake. And it shows up in a variety of different ways. And I unpack that in the first chapter. And then once people are bought into this notion of friction as a potential driver of teams that win consistently, then there's these 3 catalysts. And a catalyst is something that produces a conversion rate, a reaction, a transformation. Friction alone without these catalysts can just feel like pain, an abuse or rug burn or something horrible, right? But friction with the catalysts becomes jet fuel for your team and your outperformance. And the 3 catalysts are trust, belonging, and connection. And these are words we use in everyday speech, but they're also behavioral science terms for what leaders can actually turn the volume up on to maximize resilience, performance, and innovation across the team. And so all the subsequent chapters are just these like blueprints for how you biohack trust, belonging, and connection into your team through very practical behaviors.
Could you give us some examples? Because so just putting the book aside, I think of friction as something that has to be solved for, right? Like that's always we have to solve for friction. There's tension and there's people arguing and whatever the thing is, it's like you have to solve for it. And it tends to feel like the downfall of a lot of leaders. It's like, I don't want to solve it.
So right. I mean, like it's when we think about friction, our personal relationship for most of us is that we are conflict averse, right? You have some drama in your friend group. You're like, oh my gosh, come on. Can't we all just get along, right? Or family gatherings at Thanksgiving, right? You have that extra glass of wine sometimes just to cope with the unnamed friction of the uncle who says something awkward and irritating in the middle of the dinner, all the things we can relate to. So what is productive friction? How is it different than the things that I'm naming? On a team, and again, right, that team is a unit of performance, right? It is a group of people aggregated with different skills and abilities in order to solve complex tasks. When you have a team, there are several behaviors of high-performing teams that are well understood that what I do is I repackage them as productive friction. So for example, Cynthia, if you and I are on a team, and we're practicing for a major client pitch for next week, right? We've got to go to market strategy and we do a practice session. And I watch you run the pitch deck. And on slide 6, you go way off your talk track, right? And I need to give you feedback. Feedback is productive friction. And what ends up happening is one of two things happens. I think, gosh, Cynthia really bombed slide 6, and I think it's going to hurt us with the client presentation, but I don't know how to give you the feedback because it feels like confronting uncle at Thanksgiving dinner. So I just avoid it. Terrible for the team, terrible for Cynthia, right? You don't get the feedback, you don't get the growth, and bad for the leader who's held accountable to closing that deal, right? There's multiple losses. Alternatively, if the team is capacitized or skilled to see this as productive friction, they have the willingness and the sort of logic model and the skill for me to say, hey, Cynthia, I can even do this at the end of the meeting if it doesn't feel appropriate to do it in the meeting, right? As we walk out of that conference room, or if we log off of Zoom, I can Slack you and go, hey, look, I love the work you're doing today. I saw something on slide 6. Can we sync before the end of the day? I'd love to give you some constructive feedback. And then having the skill to do this in a way that is direct and candid, but not personal or intense. And so that's an example of productive friction. Does it feel good to get feedback? Heck no. Right? Even constructive feedback, if delivered skillfully, is like, oh God, I wish I hadn't bombed the talk track for slide 6, right? All of that. But you need it. Anybody who has advanced in their career has had the gift of productive friction. Same thing for conflict, right? The team that never fights is the team that never innovates. The reality is that innovation requires the combustion of different viewpoints in order to make something better. And when you study teams that innovate consistently, particularly in high tech, what you see is the willingness and the skill to bring strong viewpoints to bear on each other and to allow those viewpoints to sharpen each other, right? And in those scenarios, 2 + 2 = 6. And the leader who opts for still water, well, I just want harmony, right? Ooh, no, we're not going to fight on this team, right? Still water is harmony. Maybe it feels more pleasant on a day-to-day. Your ceiling for innovation for that team is very low. And most complex teams these days are tasked with some element of innovation. Rarely are teams given the role of, hey, just keep the widgets running on the widget machine, right? Like, don't change anything. You know what I mean? That's not the world we work in anymore. So those are two examples of how productive friction is this necessity for teams that conquer disruptive change. And I can give more, but I think you get the gist of why this becomes table stakes, and then why trust, belonging, and connection become these magical catalysts, which allow the team to do the thing of healthy feedback, constructive feedback, to engage in robust conflict, right? You do that without trust or without connection, and it just feels like war. You do that within trust and connection, and it feels like iron sharpening iron.
How do you build the trust and connection, or is it something that's built into culture?
Oh, that's a great question. Culture. There's so many people who write about culture, and I'm not going to do them service in my little quick shorthand here. But for me, I think about culture as the operating system of the team. So I use a lot of tech metaphors, but culture is the slipstream that the team is already in. It's so if you don't want operating system, you can also think of this as a slipstream. You're already in a membrane that touches everything you do, and that is either contributing to your success or your lack thereof. Culture sits at the bottom of the team's foundation, and everything emanates up from culture. So when we think about behavior, trust is about behaviors, belonging is about behaviors, connection is about behaviors. You've asked a very complex question, and I actually do work on this. I have something called the First Teams Blueprint, where we actually re-engineer team culture in a one-day offsite, so that when people go, gosh, I want our team to operate like a first team. A first team is the team that actually thinks and acts like your success is my success, right? And we're not going to all show up here, elbows on the table, fighting for our subdivisions. We actually think of the whole of the team as what's worth fighting for, right? That's a first team. And what are the cultural elements that get you there? And how do, once you attune those correctly, then, investing in the behaviors that generate and sustain trust or generate and sustain belonging or connection become feasible. A lot of times what happens is leaders go, yeah, Vijay, I love what you wrote on trust in chapter 2 of your book. I'm gonna do something with my team. I'm going to pull them together and do a ground rules exercise, right? If you do a ground rules exercise in the benefit of trust with your team, but the culture of your team is like the first person to shank someone else in the back gets rewarded for that behavior because that's the culture of your organization, your team, then your ground rules exercise is performative, right? Like everybody's going to sit in that room and go, oh, okay, you want us to talk about make I statements, not you statements or whatever, right? This is a safe space for disagreement, right? But everybody's just giving you lip service because ultimately the culture that the slipstream or the operating system for the team is you're actually all in a ring and you're meant to fight it out for the few bones that are thrown into the ring. Well, then forget about it. Trust is a foregone conclusion in that environment, right? So, the behaviors that you want for your team really have to be fully aligned with the core DNA or operating system of the team, and that's your culture. And there are real mechanics to work on this. We use words and they seem diffuse, but there's processes to actually reboot your team's cultural DNA. And those, I do that in my first team's blueprint with command teams.
I'm going to ask a question that it just based on your experience looking at Zynga, VMware, Dropbox. Is there a significant difference, or have you found a significant difference between when the founders of a company are on the team and when they're not? Is that part of your yeah?
Yeah. So I have some experience with founder-led organizations. And I also have read a fair bit about founder-led organizations. So I'll offer an opinion here, right? This is, this is not meant to be definitive or authoritative. It's one dude's opinion based on limited human experience. But I think that there are limits to what people can do with culture in a founder-led organization, because ultimately the founder put a huge amount of their DNA into the organization. And so when you as a team member or a leader are thinking about joining a founder-led organization, a huge amount of your interviewing of that company should be to interrogate ruthlessly what the existing culture is, because your limits on changing it are pretty extreme. Sometimes you can go into a place and really kind of be like, sure, I get that that's the broader ethos, but I'm going to run my team in this way. In a founder-led org, that's very difficult. Everything from the benefits stack to the core employee experience modalities to the learning management system are really a reflection of the founder. And that's why values alignment and cultural alignment between somebody considering joining an organization and the founder themselves, I think, are so important. And if you're 95% aligned, go do your thing. It actually may feel like you're in one of the best tailwinds of your life, because you're in a simpatico relationship with the operating system of the organization, right? But if you go in and you have 50% dissonance, you're just going to be fighting tooth and nail every day. You're in one of the biggest headwinds of your life. And as a coach, when I've coached executives who feel like they're just burning out, hitting their OKRs or hitting their goals, oftentimes when we dig into when we dig back to a cultural analysis, they're doing great work, but they're so out of sync with the culture that they're working in that they're using half of their energy in what's called covering. They're showing up differently so that they can fit in. Mm-hmm. And then they're doing the work. And it's like, why don't we get you to an organization where you can take the 50% of your calories back that you've been putting into covering and then just start kicking butt at work?
Yeah. No, I love that. I wish we could talk even more. We're at time here, but I have to. We are in 2025. People are really looking to improve their teams, improve their culture. I mean, this is the start of the year. It's always like this, right? I'm in the same boat. How can someone first of all, who should engage you? How can we engage you? And then where can we find the book?
Oh, well, thank you for the question. So The Alchemy of Talent is available wherever books are sold. Amazon, Barnes & Noble's, Walmart, Books A Million. You can also find out a lot more about the book and me at vijaypendakur.com. Or you can just put my name into Google. One of the benefits of having my name is that there's just me. So you can always find me very easily. And I'm very active on LinkedIn. So if you want to be engaged in an ongoing conversation about the power of teams, practical skills that leaders can use, you can follow my LinkedIn, subscribe to my newsletter, those kinds of things. I think that 2025, right? We're at the start of a new year. 2024 was a lot of disruption. I had a lot of friends go through layoffs and then find new roles. And so, January is a time to be filled with hope and optimism. And I think one practical tip I just want to leave our viewers and listeners with right now is that you can do amazing work with your team, regardless of how complex and how spread out the team by taking the things that are important to you and making them into rituals. Talk a lot about rituals in the book. A ritual is a quick, low friction thing that you do that on a regular basis. So you take something that from the book that you feel like really sustains belonging, like the science of recognition, and you ritualize it. Or you take the science of connection on your distributed team, hybrid, on-site, off-site, multi-generational, multi-continent team, and you create rituals of connection that you weave into the cadence of the way your team works. Rituals actually have this multiplier effect on the catalyst of belonging or connection or trust. And that's the little tip I can give you. It takes no budget. It's just a little bit of intention to ritualize the things that you do. And that's actually where you get the real lift from the alchemy of talent.
Jay, it was a pleasure to have you here, honestly. This is a topic that gets brought up across all of the interviews that we do, across all of the entrepreneurs and executives that we work with. It's and the fact that it's 3 hours long is a 3-hour plane ride long is brilliant. So I'm going to encourage everyone, please, consider reach out to us. If you don't want to reach out to Vijay, we will direct you to the book. It'll be in the show notes as well. Thank you again for joining us. And we'll be back next week with another episode of Bestseller Live. Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye, everybody.